Thank you for listening to the History of the Papacy podcast. And this time around, I am your host, Steve. You can find show notes, how to contact me, sign up for our mailing list, and how to support the History of the Papacy by going to our website, a2zhistorypage.com. Speaking of supporting the show, Patreon is a great way to do that. And you can find more at patreon.com/History of the Papacy. There's 4 tiers: Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Rome. One of the greatest benefits is you will be included on the History of the Papacy diptychs, but not only that, you'll get bonus audio. You'll get, at certain levels, be included on monthly book drawings. Everybody gets early content. Everybody gets ad-free content. So sign up early so that your name is on the top of the lists. Little History of the Papacy diptychs fun fact: much like in Christianity, where the church is both the physical building and the group of people, the same goes for Freemasonry. The lodge refers to both the building and the membership. With that, now let us commemorate the Patreon patrons on the History of the Papacy diptychs. We have Roberto, Joran, William B., Brian, Jeffrey, Christina, John, Sarah, William H., and Augustus at the Alexandria level. We have Roberto, Joran, William B., Brian, Jeffrey, Christina, John, Sarah, William H., Augustus, and Keanu at the Alexandria level. We have Doppo, Paul, Justin, Lana, John, and Steve, all of whom are magnificent at Constantinople and reaching that ultimate power and prestige, that of the See of Rome. We have Peter the Great, Leonard the Great, Alex the Great, and Amma the Great. Today we begin a 2-part conversation on the history of Freemasonry during the 19th century. We are joined by author and historian John Dickie to find out who the Freemasons were, and particularly the Catholic Church of the 19th century had so much conflict with the Freemasons. With that, I present the next piece of the mosaic of the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Today, I am really excited to have a special guest on today, Professor John Dickie, who is a professor of Italian Studies at University College London. Professor Dickie is the author of numerous books, including, and importantly for today, The Craft: How the Freemasons Created the World. Mr. Dickie has also been a guest on many documentaries and was host of the World Pasta Championship, which I thought that was really cool. Maybe before we even get started, what got you interested in the Freemasons as a topic?
Well, my main field of interest is the Sicilian Mafia. I've published all sorts of books and academic articles on mafia organizations in Italy. And it's a curious story, incidentally. In 2013, the summer of 2013, they arrested a fugitive mafia boss who'd been living under an assumed name for 20 years as an anonymous sort of limousine driver on the outskirts of London. And it's not every day that kind of thing happens in London. So I spent a lot of time on the media explaining the basics of the Sicilian Mafia to, BBC, TV shows and radio stations and so on and so forth. And in the course of that, as I very often do when people ask, what is the mafia? I say, well, mafiosi themselves define it as a kind of Freemasonry for criminals. There were similar sorts of structures and so on. And then I got home at the end of the day and found an email from the head of communications of the United Grand Lodge of England, who told me that he'd been bombarded with indignant phone calls from Freemasons who had assumed that I meant to accuse them of being the mafia. And would I like to come in for a chat? And I went in for that chat, went into the Freemasons Hall in Covent Garden in London, and had a really interesting discussion with them. And it really struck me then that really the stories that are out there in the public domain about Freemasonry, particularly about its history, really boil down to two opposed types. For most people, for the Freemasons, it's this sort of noble tradition of selflessness and brotherhood, and so on and so forth. And for a lot of other people, it's this grubby cabal, or even worse, a conspiracy. And when you look across the big arc of Masonic history, while both of those stories have a little bit of truth to them, they don't begin to cover the kind of kaleidoscope of ways in which Freemasonry has affected history and interacted with history at a global level, because it is a global.
In the broadest strokes, what is Freemasonry?
Freemasonry is a fraternal organization based on rituals and myths and symbols. Most of those symbols, the most important of them at least, derive from the work and the accoutrements of medieval stonemasons, so aprons, gloves, trowels, and the like. And those symbols have a ritual function in teaching moral lessons through ritual. And those moral lessons go towards, if you like, metaphorically, building a better man, just as the medieval stonemasons once built castles and cathedrals. That's roughly what Freemasonry is at its heart.
Where did Freemasonry begin? Because there's sort of the legendary explanation, and what's maybe the historical explanation, and how does that blend in with their legendary beginnings?
Right from the beginning, Freemasons have been wedded to a whole series of legends, that somehow project their past all the way back to the Temple of King Solomon or to the Middle Ages or whatever it might be. We're now much more certain about those origins, and there were two key moments, I think. The first was at the very, very end of the 16th century in Scotland, when we first get, and we're talking about the elite of stonemasons. So we're in the Renaissance, if you like, rather than the Middle Ages, the early modern period, rather than the Middle Ages, as Freemasons believe, where you get a contact between the sort of guild culture of elite Scottish stonemasons and a Renaissance court with its various intellectual fashions and so on. And that sort of cross-fertilization opens these guild organizations, which then began to be called lodges, to gentlemen who had nothing to do with building buildings. Yeah. And then there's a second moment, not in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh of James VI of Scotland, the king, but in London. London in the early 18th century, the London of the beginning of the Whig ascendancy, as it's known, when Freemasonry acquires its rule book, acquires a new structure with a grand lodge to regulate its affairs in England. And really at that point, it loses all contact with real stonemasons or real builders. They tended actually to be what would be architects these days, men of very grand status by comparison with humble builders, if you like. And at that point, it becomes a kind of gentleman's club. And at that point also in the early 18th century, it begins to expand across the world on following the same routes as empire and commerce. So very, very quickly, it's an astonishingly quick spread. Within 15, 20 years, you've got Masonic lodges in Charleston, in Boston, in the Caribbean, in India, across Europe, in the Middle East. It was a phenomenon that had found its moment, if you like, and didn't look back from there.
Steve here again. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Josh Cohen's Eyewitness History and many other great shows. Go to Parthenon Podcast to learn more. And now, here is a quick word from our sponsors. The demographics of the group, so you're pointing towards, these are the people who are they the merchant class? Are they the upper class? Who was drawn the most towards becoming a Freemason?
It depends a bit where you go, because the sort of class connotations, but also religious connotations and so on, of Freemasons vary a little bit wherever you go. But really, they're a sort of middle class organization who would look to gentlemen, in the terms of the 18th century, gentry rather, but who would be looking to sponsorship from the elite, if you like, to guarantee their status, to provide support, to protect them from any, political dangers, people who might think they were doing something dodgy in their lodges, and so on and so forth.
Let's start to zoom in, because the focus of this series is the 18th and the 19th century in Italy and with the Catholic Church. These groups of people, these Freemasons, what was their situation in the late 18th century, early 19th century, this time of Enlightenment and revolution? What role did they play in the grand scheme of politics and culture at that time?
Yeah. Now, it's often said, and I think often with good reason, that the Freemasons became a kind of school of public life in various parts of them. I mean, they did all kinds of different things. They were sort of, very quickly, London lost control of the Masonic brand, if you like, as it spread around the world, and all kinds of different forms of Freemasonry evolved. Performing sort of magic rituals, all kinds of things, and disobeying the founding rules. But broadly speaking, yes, they were aligned with Enlightenment values. They did act as a kind of halfway house towards a more secular society where a certain formal equality between men operated. Formal in the sense of rule-bound equality, right under the modern sort of rule of law and on our way towards modern democracy. Now, that already made them subject to suspicion on the part of absolutist Europe. A society that had religious tolerance as one of its founding beliefs. That's very important. In 18th century London, you find all kinds of members of different Protestant churches as members, but also Jews, also Catholics, deists. I mean, this was really one of the most remarkable things about 18th century Freemasons. But again, from the point of the sort of absolutist Catholic powers, that looks very, very suspicious. And what really energizes those suspicions is the Masonic cult of secrecy, which is something that is very, very important, because that acts as the sort of engine of suspicion surrounding Freemasonry and the suspicion that accompanies throughout its history.
I think we need to mention a little bit more about the secrecy aspect. Could you maybe fill us in a little bit on, and that's probably what most people are interested in, what they know the Masons most for, is what is the secrecy of the organization?
Yeah. Masonic rituals revolve around secret. The rituals are secret, supposed to be secret. They're conducted in a secluded place, closed space inside a lodge. The rituals involve learning secrets, and the secrets are hidden behind symbols and allegories and stories and so on. And at the same time, they're also, you have to swear terrifying oaths to keep the secret. But there's a curious paradox in Masonic secrecy, because actually when you strip away all of this ritual paraphernalia, the secrets of Freemasonry are disarmingly banal. The three most important secrets that Freemasons learn in the course of these elaborate long rituals that they go through are, in order: try to be a nice guy, try to learn more about the world. And thirdly, and most importantly, death's a pretty serious business, and it kind of makes you reflect on things a bit. Which, of course, makes me wonder, well, why all the fuss about such platitudes? And the reason, I think, is that because Freemasonry is a child of an age of ferocious religious conflict and also of the Enlightenment, if you're going to create an organization that has a sense of the sacred about belonging to it, then you can't put any religious credo or any theological principles or any political principles at the heart of your brotherhood, because everything's controversial in that period. So what you have instead is bland home truths that everybody can subscribe to, but then you wrap them in this elaborate cult of secrecy, which acts to attract people towards the Freemasons. I want to become a member because I want to get access to the secrets, but also binds people together once they're there, once they're inside, because not only are they the possessors of the secrets, but they've also been through the elaborate rituals together and put a lot of effort into performing them that make them belong. So secrecy is crucial to Freemasonry, but at the same time, inevitably, it creates suspicion. It creates the idea that they're up to no good.
It kind of reminds me of a mystery cult or a mystery religion from the Roman era and the Greco-Roman era. Were the Masons trying to make almost a new religion? Because it kind of sounds like religion, how you're explaining it, but religion with maybe a certain element stripped away.
That's certainly how the Catholic Church perceived Freemasonry. They thought the Catholic Church perceived them as heretics. Yeah, the secret was heresy or even devil worship. Freemasons fervently deny that they are a religion, in the sense they say, well, we don't have any theological code for you to subscribe to. In the predominant versions of Freemasonry, you have to believe in God to be a member, but you can be a member of any religion. You can be a believer. You can take your oaths on any sacred book that you like. So in that sense, Freemasonry isn't a religion, but I think it does some of the work of a religion. I think you're right. It's a kind of second order religion. And one of the things that it does is confront the fear of death. Death, symbolically represented, is present in all Masonic rituals in one way or another, through skulls or coffins or swords or nooses round the neck or whatever it might be. And I think, as the famous philosopher Bertrand Russell said, the fear of death is really the motivating force behind all religion. And I think Freemasonry gives a shape to death, gives you a sense that you can confront it with your brethren, you can confront that fear. And in that very, very basic sense, it is doing some of the sort of spiritual work that religions do.
Let's maybe get into some of the conflict points that the Catholic Church had with Freemasonry. One of them that seems to come up is, like you said, with the secret society aspect, but also with oath taking, that the Catholic Church traditionally didn't like anybody making oaths. What were some of the other conflict points, especially political ones, between the Catholic Church? Really, why did the Catholic Church have such problems with the Masons?
Yeah. The Catholic Church, the Pope excommunicated the Freemasons for the first time in 1738, and that excommunication would be repeated again and again throughout history and is still in force today. The last pronunciation on it was in 1983. You have to remember so the basic reasons are theological, exactly. Oath taking, the idea that the Freemasons espouse a certain degree of religious pluralism when the church believes it possesses the ultimate truth. That's what it's all about, the Catholic Church. But you have to remember in the 18th century and for first part of the 19th century, the Pope wasn't just a Pope, he was a king as well. He was an absolute monarch in a large band of territory across central Italy. from Rome up to Bologna and thereabouts. And so he voiced misgivings on political reasons as well, mixed political and religious reasons. Again, in his mind, there wouldn't have been any difference really between the two. The Freemasons looked very suspicious because politics wasn't supposed to happen anywhere out there in society. It was supposed to happen in the court. And yet suddenly you've got this group of men organizing on their own terms, doing something that looked very like politics, or at least civic gathering. There were rumors, not always unfounded, it has to be said, that Freemasons were British spies. Britain itself was deeply suspicious because of its newspapers and its overmighty parliament, and the fact that it, of course, was a Protestant state that espoused a certain degree of religious tolerance by the 18th century. So those, in a sense, Freemasonry, with the electrifying force of secrecy, embodied a whole set of no-nos for the papacy in the 18th century and going forward into the 19th.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. It's kind of interesting. You see the parallels between an organization like the Catholic Church and the Masons, that they're transnational, that they don't necessarily answer directly to the state. How did the monarchs around Europe feel at that point about the Masons? You said that the court didn't like that these political units were getting in, this outside unit was getting involved in politics. What did, say, the British government or some of the governments that were more enlightened think about the Masons?
It comes to a head as we move towards the French Revolution, and the fear of political groupings, the fear of conspiracies grows. And Britain has its Masonic scare at the end of the 19th century, at the end of the 18th century, passes laws against secret societies. And that's when the political temperature starts to rise around the time of the French Revolution. Indeed, the modern conspiracy theory, in the sense of the idea that there is a secret elite controlling world affairs from behind the scenes somewhere, we owe to the fear of Freemasonry at the time of the French Revolution, in the aftermath of the French Revolution. You have to remember that the French Revolution was cataclysmic for Europe, terrifying. It seemed to have completely come out of nowhere and completely turned the world upside down. And particularly the Catholic Church, but also absolute monarchs, were scrabbling around looking for an explanation. And the man who crystallized the first modern conspiracy theory was a former Jesuit priest, not coincidentally, living in exile in London. He was French, but lived in exile in London. The Abbé Barruel lived very near what is now Marble Arch, for those of you who know London. And he wrote a huge, long explanation of the causes of the French Revolution, published in 1797, which blamed it all on a conspiracy by the Freemason. And that was an extraordinarily contagious idea. Again, the idea of the Masonic plot had found its time and electrified readers. This book was translated and reproduced throughout the century and had a huge influence, particularly on the way the Catholic Church thought about Freemasonry, but also many people far beyond that.
Were they, now, with the conspiracy theory, what was the heart of their conspiracy theory? Was it that the Masons were actually subverting, or they were the motive force behind the French Revolution? Or did it even go further down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, the idea that was they were both demonic and anarchistic, and they wanted to destroy all kings, all states, all societies. They were inspired by Satan, But, very simply.
In Italy, if we zoom into Italy, there were Freemasons there, and who are some of the top Freemasons? I know Giuseppe Garibaldi was a Freemason, but there was also some other secret societies going on there as well. What was kind of their secret society Mason situation, especially around the time of the Italian unification, Risorgimento?
Yeah, that's really a crucial period and a fascinating context, because at the very same moment that the Catholic Church is espousing these crazy conspiracy theories, real conspirators, real political radicals are using Freemasonry or organizations modeled on and or closely related to Freemasonry to engage in conspiracy. And the key example here, there are examples in different parts of the world, but the most notorious of them was the charcoal burners, the Carbonari of Italy, who were an offshoot of Freemasonry, who have a very strange history, and that they seem to have been founded by leading functionaries of the Napoleonic regime in Italy. Yeah, Napoleon for a while, at the full extent of his empire, ruled southern Italy through the person of his brother-in-law, the King of Naples, Joachim Murat, who was also Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Naples. And he, like Napoleon before him, was using the Freemasons as a tool of his regime, a way of binding the new men who had asserted themselves in the Napoleonic administration or the army into the regime. And they were doing that in Naples. But at the same time, these charcoal burners and these Masonic lodges start to become also centers of opposition to Napoleonic rule. At a time when political parties didn't exist, in a sense, they become the place that you do politics. And politics at that time was a pretty violent, conspiratorial business. There was, because the Napoleonic regime had overturned the legal system, threatened the ownership of property, and there was a lot of really brutal fighting at a local level, brutal struggles over local resources and land and power and so on and so forth. And people tended to gravitate towards secret societies to protect themselves and to get one over on everybody else. And out of this mixture of conspiracy, of police infiltration, of, they recruited gangsters or bandits into their secret societies to point them at the other guys, so on and so forth. That is the milieu out of which Italian unification would eventually emerge. And it is also the milieu out of which the Sicilian Mafia and the Neapolitan Camorra would emerge.
Wow.
Working precisely on that same Masonic template of organization.